This was on the front page of the Friday edition of the Wall Street Journal. And I'm going to hold this up so you can see it. Down here in the corner, number one for misinformation. That's the story right here that I'm pointing to. They, at the Brookings Institute, supposedly reviewed all podcasts and made the choice to rank them based on the misinformation that they were providing. And they ranked Clay and Buck third overall in terms of political podcast radio, most misinformation being spread. And this was a study released by the Brookings Institute. Again, it had us in third place. And here's what they said about their methodology. Researchers at Brookings downloaded and transcribed 36,603 podcast episodes from 79 political talk shows that had been released before January 22nd of 2022. This was a long time ago. Over a year ago, they were looking at what was said on these shows. When researchers compared the show's transcripts against a list of keywords and common falsehoods identified by fact checkers, they found that we were in third place overall. They said that 15.4% of our episodes, as well as combined with the Rush Limbaugh show, that we had unsubstantiated or false claims. So when I saw this story come out on Friday, I told our staff, I said, hey, let's reach out to the Brookings Institute. Let's allow this study author or any other person employed at the Brookings Institute to come on our program and explain to our audience what misinformation we have been spreading. And we said you can come on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, wide open, any day. You pick a time. We're on for 3 hours every day. And we're giving you a runway of the entire week to come on. They said they didn't have the time to come on. Said they couldn't do it. And so then we've also reached out, so you know, to the New York Times author of this story. And we'll see whether or not he'll come on the show. My guess is that he will not. And the reason why I think this is significant is this is how the sausage is made in a censorious media cancel culture. Look, what happens with the Brookings Institute is they're paid effectively by super rich people to go out and do the work that the super rich people are not willing to do themselves. Then they launder that information through the New York Times in an effort to restrict what people like me are allowed to say, because people can't find our content because the algorithms get adjusted because they've all presumed and accepted that we are spreading misinformation. And this is important. I'm reading a couple of paragraphs because this is ultimately what's at play here. The findings underscore the vital role Apple, Google, and a constellation of podcast apps play in connecting disinformation peddlers. Evidently, I am a disinformation peddler to their audiences. Researchers sourced shows from Apple podcast lists. Big tech companies, and this is the crux of this is the reason this entire article was written. This is the entire reason that Brookings got into this in the first place. Big tech companies have taken a largely hands-off approach to podcast content and avoided the kind of scrutiny that's dogged social networks for years. The companies say they have little responsibility for podcast content because they're effectively search engines connecting listeners to shows but never hosting content. The companies have policies that ban hateful language or content that might incite violence. But researchers said those policies were, and I'm reading directly from the New York Times article, vague and poorly enforced, allowing false content to spread. They then reached out to Apple and Google saying hey, the Brookings Institute said that there is misinformation on these shows. Why are you allowing them to be carried on your podcast networks? Ivy Choi said the company did not recommend shows through its algorithm, this is Google, if they contain, quote, harmful misinformation. A spokesman for Apple declined to comment. Okay, this is how the sausage is made. This is frankly how the fake news takes root. So we offered the Brookings Institute an opportunity to come on our show and actually lay out what misinformation we are sharing on our show. Because the first big issue here is, what is misinformation? How do you define it? What is the difference between a fact and an opinion? How can you even label an opinion, which by its very nature is that an opinion, as true or false? My opinion is that Patrick Mahomes is going to win 5 Super Bowls. In 20 years, if he only wins 4, that opinion may well end up being wrong, but it's not a misinformation. It's not disinformation. Something is either true or false if it is a fact. Otherwise, it's an opinion. So I want to know, what is the disinformation? What is the misinformation? Brookings Institute won't tell us. New York Times won't tell us. Yet they have already written this entire story attacking our show in an effort to get algorithms adjusted so fewer people will be able to see our content. It's a big deal because a lot of podcast exposure leads to new podcast listeners. And so this is intended to be a direct assault upon our business. And this is why the Supreme Court is hearing a case that I think is so important. Algorithms should all be public because they are editorial decisions. And a person designs an algorithm. I could design an algorithm to make our radio show number 1 in all facets. That would be easy to do on a podcast network. We have tens of millions of downloaders. But I could also design an algorithm that made it very difficult to find our show. What is going on here when big companies say, oh, that's not us, that's the algorithm? They're trying to pass the buck on the fact that they design, implement, and choose which algorithms to feature, which to me is a direct editorial decision. There should be consequences for how these algorithms are designed. And frankly, I believe all of the algorithms should be publicly available data so everyone can see the criteria upon which they are basing these decisions. That's my opinion. Because otherwise, you are ending up with a rig job. We're doing our radio show with a 100-pound weight to our back, while left-wing podcasters are effectively getting to hop on scooters and go running around all over the place because their information is being favored. This is BS. This is the definition of fake news. When you reach out to someone and actually offer them the opportunity to come on and explain it, they won't do it. The Brookings Institute, in conjunction with the New York Times, laundered a fake story to make it look like a real story so they could have an impact from Apple and from Google to restrict people's ability to find our program. It's a big deal. It's happening all the time. It just happened to us. And some of you out there might say, why even mention this? The answer is because I think it's important to fight back against these lies, against this disinformation, against this misinformation, which is being purveyed by places like the New York Times and the Washington Post, which in my opinion, since the Donald Trump presidential campaign began, have been the largest purveyors of misinformation and disinformation in all of the media, period.